Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to the Hoon, where co-host Peter Bale and I go around the week's news in geopolitics and Aotearoa's political economy with a whole bunch of experts, academics and politicians, all to understand our worlds better and have some fun. Hello and welcome in, everyone. Kia ora koutou katoa. I am Bernard Hickey, co-host here in another location on Waiheke Island.
Did you have to walk over some homeless people, as one of our critics suggested on the way to you? Are you in some glamorous vineyard?
No,
and you've had to basically use homeless people as stand-up paddle boards to get there.
That's a mainlander cliche.
Yeah.
Actually, interesting. If you look at the spread of homes and wealth and income across the island, it's actually wider and involves a whole bunch more people who are really struggling than a lot of people think. And,
it used to be way before you were there, Bernard. There was a period when somebody I know, actually, now that I realise it, had quite a few properties in Waiheke, and they were essentially DPB properties. Women in the DPB were renting, probably quite substantial. I mean, better not defame my friend, but it wasn't an easy place to live in. This is probably 15 years ago. And they needed, it was a relatively inexpensive place to stay, which it certainly isn't now. So anyway, lovely to see you, Ben. That's a beautiful surrounding. And also, it's very nice to hear Tui behind you.
Oh, yes. And I've got a big old bird bath in front of me. And if we're really lucky during the show, there'll be a performance put on by Tui, and I may well flip the laptop round for people to look at.
Do you have bird feeders at your place, Bernard? Yet?
No, what we do is we put oranges onto
the
railings, and people and hope like heck that the tuis turn up. They often do.
Because it's always very important to remember that most New Zealand native birds do not like seeds. They like honey or, as you say, citrus.
Yeah.
This is good to see. I think it's probably as we go into this Easter holiday, it's all right to have a little bit of a digression at the beginning. There's a couple of people who get a bit toey about it, and they're probably all in their cars on the way to
a chance to join as well. You can see the numbers piling in the first 4 or 5 minutes. And, you don't want to miss the crucial stuff right at the start. So
but I think I quite like that we talking to Simon as well, our lovely producer Simon, about his what he's up to. I mean, you only want to hear about 10 seconds of it because otherwise he'll bore us to death with his motorcycle stories. But
we've got our own boring old man car stories too. So this is all good. So it's been quite a week.
I don't think I understand what you're talking about, Bernard. You were just talking to me about the electric Twingo, which I think I'm pretty certain is not going to come to New Zealand. And I can tell you that the electric Renault 4 is not coming to Australia because of a really stupid Australian rule about where it's what do they call those clips for the protect child seats aren't compliant with whatever the current Australian rules are. So we'll never see it.
We better get over that stuff.
So I'm going to get a V8 double cab ute instead, as I always say.
Well, you may well be parked in your driveway with nowhere to go because there'll be no fuel by the end of May if the last tanker, which is currently scheduled for April the 22nd, is not joined by new tankers in the following days.
We're going to be talking quite a lot about this tonight, I think. We're going to have some beneficial aspects of it from Catherine, or some thoughts about it. I noticed also you didn't, in fact, posted 5 things to be a better human that we agreed that you would do last week, or at least I told you to do. And since I'm not in charge of the kaka, you just, thought, fuck off. It's my birthday.
So I was a tad exhausted by the end of the day, I must say. And
you waited a day to put out the kaka, the Hoon onto the...
Yeah.
There were people ringing me from all over the world saying, where is the Hoon?
I will do better tomorrow.
No worries
It's been a heck of a couple of weeks, to be frank, with lots of news about. And I must say, I'm not struggling, but I'm really at full capacity, just coping with the fire.
Well, it's right. The thing is, it's right. As we used to say in America, and hopefully, it's right in your wheelhouse. You do your brilliant thing with the ANZ with all its market people, and I don't think you should ever underestimate the importance, and people should think about listening to Bernard's early morning podcast, 5 from 5 from the ANZ, because because he's a lunatic and works in a period when the US is open and New Zealand is not. It will be your first signal about what actually might be intelligent investment thinking. Not buys and sells necessarily, but it may give you some. So I think you do a brilliant job of that, and I think a lot of media companies really should think about having you or other people stay up at 3 o'clock in the morning and doing their work.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I'm essentially an economics and financial reporter to my. The core
Trousers.
of my bones,
yeah.
And I've worked for Reuters for over a decade, and I've been fascinated by geopolitics and global economics and financial markets and how they all tie each other together. And it's never been a more volatile, interesting, wild time.
And also all of the things that you care about or you understand and can explain to people are happening now. You know, you've got the bond markets going bonkers. You've got all of these instruments responding in chaotic and strange ways, or responding in practical ways. You know, people seeking to minimize risk, struggling to capitalize on risk. Although I was thinking, along with Pete Hegseth, I was thinking about buying Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, just particularly in order to wind you up next week, actually.
Well, you need to make sure he tells you what he's going to do privately beforehand. And you can also use these betting platforms like Polymarket and Kalshi to get ahead of the game. And in fact, I think, you know, the wisdom of the crowds is useful to look at, and the Polymarket view on when the Strait of Hormuz is going to open, and in particular, will it open in April, is currently falling towards naught. At various points, it's been 30%, 40%, 50% as the chances of opening before the end of April. And after Trump's speech earlier this afternoon, our time, it has continued to fall. And
yes, it would. As it would. Well, we were talking about this before, you know, that we both... Did you listen to it?
I read it. I can't stand
I listened to the whole...
Anyway.
I was scooting along on my electric scooter to the grocery store, having, you know, basically torched my own vehicle, one of my petrol-powered vehicles, and left it a sort of smoking wreck on the side of the road, because I know I'll never be able to use it again. But it was completely, and we're going to talk to Robert Patman about this a little bit when we get into the international section, and I guess we're going to talk to Catherine about it, and we're probably going to talk to Max Rashbrook about it in the domestic section. It was utterly unhinged. It was classic. If you think about the 25th Amendment, the entire, which is, you know, the amendment you invoke for a president who's no longer fit to hold the office, this was it. The entire cabinet should have been, well, probably were there, just thinking, oh my God, how are we going to deal with this? It was, you know, virtually every word other than I and they and we and me was a lie, and the contentions were bollocks. It was. You know, we've gotten used to... I mean, this is the other thing. He's normalised everything being completely insane.
Yeah. And
but this was
in power.
This was double insane. Insane 2.0.
Yeah, and you can see that his thinking is disordered, his connection to reality is gone, and he's saying things that are completely at odds with each other, like, I want a quick exit, and at the second time, and also I'm going to bomb them to the Stone Age.
Yeah, I thought that was because we've heard that before from even bigger idiots. Well, sorry, less powerful idiots, but similar idiots. I mean, that was an incredible sort of Doctor. I mean, I might tonight actually watch Dr. Strangelove, the great Peter Sellers film, because, you know, this is just so diabolical. And then to talk also about how there's no inflation in the United States. We don't need the petrol. We don't need the fuel anyway. All those pesky Europeans should buy, and the Japanese should buy their fuel from us because we've got plenty. It was weird, but we'll do the sort of what it means for the Allies in the Robert section, I suppose.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, I thought the first term was about as wild as it could get, and I was so glad when it was over because we could all just breathe a bit. And then, of course, COVID turned up. The
third term is going to be a bloody doozy.
Oh boy! And will we have?
Because he was robbed from the real second term, so we could consider this the third term.
Yeah, and he is. We wonder whether we'll actually have midterm elections. Interestingly, the Iranians will be using their leverage over Trump before the midterms, which for me is one of those things to think about in terms of when we might get our fresh fuel tankers through, because that Strait of Hormuz could well be closed for the rest of the year.
Yep.
And
Bernard, should we do because I know we've got Catherine in the green room, which is very appropriate for her. Shall we just quickly do your 3 things to watch?
Yeah, I'll keep it quick. Essentially, over the next week, I'll be looking out for the next set of polls in New Zealand, which I think will be bad for National and Christopher Luxon. We've already had a sneak preview with the Roy Morgan poll, and there is reports out that a Talbot Mills poll is also showing National below 30%. And remember, 30% is the threshold below which Nicola Willis and Chris Bishop don't get back into Parliament as list MPs. Secondly, the date I'm penciling in my calendar right now is April 22nd. That's the last tanker as of the last 3 or 4 days of notifications from the refineries, and that would mean we'd be close to out of fuel by the end of May if we don't take any great measures. The rest of the world is taking great measures. They are introducing working from home, going to carless days, rationing in all sorts of ways. We haven't even started.
Well, particularly countries a little bit like us, a long way away. But again, let's. I mean, what do you? Sorry, number 2, Bernard.
Yeah, so that was number 2, and number 3. I think a good government would be right now bringing in a war-style decarbonisation of our transport fleet in particular, which means some sort of electric car for clunker swap scheme, reintroduction of the clean car discount scheme, one that's truly neutral. So the double cab drivers pay for the subsidy for people to buy properly electric cars. And I'm going to trigger all your woke alerts, Peter.
My non-woke alerts, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And really go for it. We've got to stop mucking around. But anyway, that's my 3 things.
Okay. So my quick ones are the inquiry into the conduct of the Judge Emma Aitken, who I've declared full knowledge of, that I've known for a long, long time, is due out now, but I don't think it's going to come. So that's kind of interesting. That's not going to come. And expect it to be really, really bad, in the sense that Winston Peters will exploit it about activist judges, and there'll probably be some of the crappiest reporting you've seen, because there's been some really crappy reporting about the actual case and the merits of it, and there's a lot of class being brought into it. So keep an eye on that, because I think it's the first time, not only in New Zealand but in the Commonwealth, that a judge has been put through this kind of process, rightly or wrongly.
Yeah, it's interesting that the courts have become the place where we're starting to look closely at these issues. For example, the involvement of Jim Grennan in the recent defamation case, and also some court action in which Jim Grennan has been criticised by a judge quite aggressively. I'll put the link in.
Yeah, well, that was going to be my third one, was to pay real attention, or go back and read. There's a very good piece, which I don't often say on One News website, about the Batchelor defamation case, which he lost graphically against Sanjana Hatatoa, who's often been on the show, who's a disinformation investigator and TVNZ. And I think there's no coincidence that Phil O'Sullivan, the former editor-in-chief of TVNZ, is no longer there. But this was a wholesale sweeping of the board on a completely confected defamation case funded by Jim Grennan for a nutter. And I think we need to be really careful about this kind of thing and expose it. And I've been very disappointed, in as much as one can be, in some dialogue that I've had on X with people from the Free Speech Union about why they have said nothing about that yet. Second one, going back to my second one, and we will bring poor old Karen in a second, Catherine in a second, is I'd like to recommend to everybody the 2 latest episodes of the podcast Past, Present, Future, which deal with communists and people changing their opinions in the early, late, middle 20th century and into the 21st. I've recommended it before, but it's Past, Present, Future with David Runciman, and the relevance to now is just extraordinary about thinking about the ideas that we've come from. Should we go to poor old Catherine? POC.
Yes, yes, no, lovely to have you on,
I'm
Catherine.
just taking notes about that.
Yeah.
POC, poor old Catherine.
No. We'll make sure we put links into those in our show notes as well. Great to see you, Catherine. It's been an enormous week in all sorts of ways for those thinking about our fossil fuel dependency and whether or not we'll drop it. What are the ways that countries in New Zealand are reacting to this crisis that will either help us get off fossil fuels or embed our dependency on fossil fuels?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, because the system in total globally, I think, is kind of geared towards maintaining a kind of high energy, economically stable system. And so that means that it's only kind of working at the margins to incrementally reduce emissions intensity, and it's not, it doesn't allow any kind of structural disruption of the fossil fuel industry. So that's kind of the background to the current, in my view, to the current crisis. So when you get into a crisis like this, the question is, how does the system respond, and how do most countries respond to that? Do they respond by accelerating the shift away from fossil fuels, or moving into that zone finally, or are they acting to reinforce or reproduce fossil fuel dependency? And there's quite a few, approaches that you can see happening in different countries that do reinforce, I think, fossil fuel dependency. So the first one is any kind of price suppression. So in Australia, for instance, we've seen a 1/3 or a halving of the tax on petrol. So what that does is it actually protects fossil fuel consumption, and it prevents demand destruction. So it prevents people from finding alternatives or moving away from using fossil fuels. We've seen state support of consumption. We've seen that here in New Zealand, where we have targeted fiscal support to low-income households, which underwrites fossil fuel consumption. It allows them to keep going out and buying it in order to get where they're going in the short term.
Yeah.
Which is a way of protecting the structural status quo. We've seen the release of strategic reserves and supply scrambling. So again, it reinforces the concept of fossil fuels as being a non-negotiable backbone of the global economy and of supply chains. We've seen regulatory relaxation. So we, in Aotearoa, we have changed our rules to allow a higher sulphur mix within supplies that we do get, so that we can accept supplies from Australia. We've seen the reduction of sanctions on exports from places like Russia and Iran.
But aren't those just pragmatic, intelligent responses in the short term, Catherine? Aren't they just, I hate to be devil's advocate as usual, but aren't they just practical, sensible responses while they rethink the entire concept?
Exactly, but what you're doing within that is you're making invisible other potential responses that would have the opposite effect. And so, and this crisis framing around energy security and price stability is kind of part of that, but there's a whole raft of other things that you could do that would have, within country approaches that we haven't seen very much of. We've only really seen them in countries where there has been an absolute reduction in the availability of fossil fuels, where they can't react on pricing, for instance, because they're, the countries don't have the wealth to put to it. But those are things like rationing of fossil fuels. We've really avoided doing any of that.
Or targeting the use of it to the people who are most critically important, presumably. Yeah.
Exactly, yep. So that would be part of rationing. Free public transport, so that's supporting a shift from people away from driving when they don't need to, and using more public transport instead. We've seen in efforts to support energy-intensive sectors rather than allowing them to contract. We haven't seen a lot of support for rapid uptake of renewables. We haven't seen support for a lot of shifting to work from home. So all of these demand reduction approaches, we've seen very little support for. What we've seen instead is support for pricing and supply, And in fact, a lot of that stuff around supporting pricing, it doesn't change the supply constraints. It doesn't, what we have is a physical supply issue. We don't have as much fossil fuels as we used to have. So supporting the price doesn't even address that problem. You still have just as little fuel available
Catherine,
as you did before you changed the pricing.
Maybe Bernard, from an economic point of view, is the one to answer this, but you can please answer it too. Is this because we are still in the time frame that this is only going to be so short term, and while it might be a wake up call for the longer future, we're just going to be able to go back to situation normal in a couple of weeks? Is that how you see the reaction to it? Because I tend at the moment towards the catastrophic on it, or the more significant on it. He said, having literally set fire to his car yesterday. But what is this because we're all thinking it's only going to be a blip? Bernard or Catherine?
There's a slight delay for Catherine, so Catherine first.
Okay.
She's refusing to answer.
No. Yeah, I think that. No, happy to answer. I think that there is a preference for a result where we don't have to deal with any of this long term, and we can protect the system the way it currently operates. And so, I think there's some wishful thinking in there, rather than facing it up to the true impacts and how long this is going to go on for. But even then, that we've had, ever since the first IPCC report in 1990, we've had 36 years of attempting to address climate change without structurally changing anything about the way we use fossil fuels. So we're very much focused on increasing electrification and renewable energy options and all this sort of thing. There was a figure that I saw the other day relating to the EU, where they basically said 20 years ago the EU was completely reliant on imported fossil fuels for 60% of its energy requirements. In the intervening 20 years, it spent something close to €1 trillion on developing renewable energy transition and all this sort of thing. And this year, it is dependent on imported fossil fuels for approximately 60% of its energy requirements.
That's
so
amazing.
That number hasn't shifted at all. So we know that the demand has increased a lot, and so that's a good part of it. If they hadn't sort of shifted more to renewables in their electricity system, then the argument could be made that they would be using more fossil fuels. But the argument could also be made that increase in availability of renewable energy has induced demand to a certain extent. It's created innovation and created new technologies and new space for things like AI to develop. And so that just, boosts overall energy demand, and you never get very far. So in terms of addressing the problem of climate change, the size of your problem hasn't shifted in those 20 years.
And that's one of the great ironies here, is that the argument, which is, the renewable stuff is getting so much cheaper, we just need to do nothing. The economics will make it a natural thing that we switch from fossil fuels to renewables. But what we know is that there is a thing called Jevons paradox, which means that as something gets cheaper, you use more of it. And this is the issue here. We've increased our renewables use, but we've done nothing really to change our fossil fuels use. And this is where, sensible economics and policy understands that there is a Jevons paradox, and you have to use regulation.
Jevons paradox, did you just say?
Yeah.
Could you say exactly what Jevons paradox is, please?
So this is where
please. Simon will edit this out if you can't quite spit it out tonight.
So this is a really good question, and it's worth everyone knowing. Jevons paradox comes from the observation that over time, in theory, we're going to shift from using coal to power the economy to using oil and maybe electricity. And there's a theory that you move from one to the other, and if the other one is cheaper, then you'll use less of that one. But it turns out, as things get cheaper, you use more in total. And so you may think, well, we use a lot less coal than we ever did, but actually we use more coal than we've ever done, even though it's a share of our total energy use.
That brings. I think we should do a show one day, where I might get completely murdered, or at least it might have to be a sliver of a show where I do the pro-growth pitch, and you two just tear me a new bottom with the anti-growth.
So firstly, I want to see the picture of your burnt out car.
So the Jevons. So Jevons paradox is related to what's called the rebound effect in economics, but I would argue that there is also, in addition to Jevons paradox, a structural effect, in the sense that the people that have used where fossil fuels have been used for energy most in the past, that is where wealth has been generated, and so people who have used fossil fuels have become wealthier, and then that wealth becomes ingrained into our institutional systems. And so there is not just inertia and path dependency in terms of the way institutions develop away from fossil fuels, but there is actual efforts to reinforce our dependence on fossil fuels because it benefits people who already have power.
Because we also think that fossil fuels have zero cost extraction. I mean, this is one of the things that have always been perplexed with Catherine, and it does go back actually to my number 2 recommendation today to the people who shifted from communism to other attitudes. But the marginal cost, depending on whether you're fracking or not, of extracting resources that are already there and that are in fact sort of nature given, as it were, is incredible. And the resources that can be extracted it all becomes not so much about the actual fossil fuel itself, but the cost of extracting it. And it essentially is a free resource.
It's getting more expensive, but even so,
absolutely. I'm actually disagreeing with. Agreeing with Catherine. I'm actually agreeing with Catherine.
and actually, when you look at the real cost of fossil fuels now, it's about half what it was in the 1970s, even though it's still $100 a barrel simply because of the inflation. Catherine, we'd love to come back to you for our chat on Luke Harrington's paper for next week, if that's all right, because we've had a good old rummage around the reaction to the
Catherine. We also do I'd have to swat up to do the growth versus no growth option.
Yes,
but I did think about it the other day, and I know that I'm not trying to say that you're literally wearing a hair shirt. But speaking of fossils, here is Dr. Patman.
Catherine, thank you very much. Robert, don't listen to him.
I'm aging by the moment.
Yeah, we all are.
Have a nice East.
Yeah, lovely to see you, Robert. Pete, you go for it.
Well, Robert, we talked a little bit earlier today about this. Did you get to listen to or watch the Trump speech, or
a little bit of it? Yeah, but it was.
I listened to the whole bloody lot while riding my electric scooter along Ponsonby Road to go and get emergency supplies for the because we're going to be having to go into the bomb shelters soon. He attacked everybody in the world except for the Gulf. He didn't actually shit on NATO the way he normally does, or the way he had earlier in the day. But his comments about allies were all about the Gulf partners, Kuwait and UAE and Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and how he was going to protect them. I mean, did you? Oil went up about $30 a barrel immediately after the thing, Bernard?
I wasn't quite 30, but it did rise about $10 a barrel, and it's clear now for anyone who's remotely paying attention that this is not going to end soon. It may not end for weeks or months, and that Iran has the United States and Donald Trump over a barrel. A literal barrel. Before the midterms, and that's November. So, we're talking about months of closure of this thing, and prices. There are very credible forecasts of a price of $200 a barrel for the next 6 months. And that's, frankly, catastrophic not catastrophic, but certainly, recession-inducing for most economies. Sorry, we haven't asked you a question yet, Robert.
I was going to say, speaking as an economist, Robert, what would you say to this? I mean, Professor Patman. Now, what was your take, dear Professor Patman? What was your take on the Trump speech today?
just as contradictory as ever. He has yet, after a month, to articulate a clear rationale for this campaign. And we even had the administration claiming this week, this was his Secretary of War claiming that the United States had achieved the aspiration of regime change because one Ayatollah had replaced another. So that apparently was stretching the term regime change.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's conflicting objectives in the American approach, and there seems to be quite a few differences within the administration. So I thought it was a very disappointing speech. I think what the markets were looking for was a clear game plan to end this conflict as soon as possible, and they didn't get it. And I don't think his constant blaming of NATO and other players will wash very long. I think many Americans realise that Mr. Trump has essentially entered this contest, or this war, I should say, to support Mr. Netanyahu's pleas to put more pressure on Iran. And I think he's got himself into a bit of a political fix, actually, and I can't see how he's going to easily resolve it.
And Robert, what can you imagine? So we often struggle with these big global issues to bring them back to a New Zealand thing, but it's not completely irrelevant. If he's shitting on NATO the way he is, then in a sense he's also shitting on the Five Eyes, and then we have a stake in all of that. What are the implications of the last month, and particularly this speech today for New Zealand?
I think his unilateral declaration, well, it wasn't a declaration, his unilateral attacks on Iran with Israel, which were illegal and premeditated and reckless, as we've seen, in a sense showed that this administration doesn't take seriously its alliances, it doesn't take seriously international law. And that was all evident in the national security statement produced by the administration in November last year. So what we've had here is confirmation that the administration does indeed have a completely different worldview from most of its liberal democratic allies. And I think it's high time these allies began to look at this administration with very clear eyes. I think there's, as we've said before, I think there's been a tendency to always give Mr. Trump the benefit of the doubt, something he doesn't extend to others. And it's ludicrous to say that countries which are part of NATO should be bailing out the United States. I mean, he keeps saying they need to keep the Strait of Hormuz open, but it was his actions that got it closed. And they had no
but
say.
They're much more dependent on it. You know, they won't come along and help us.
Yeah, and so it seems to me that that's not really going to, that argument's not going to it's not going to stick, and it will, of course, amongst the mega people, I suppose. But I do think something that you've been writing about, Peter, that we may be approaching the point where the West does really, we've heard words from Ursula von der Leyen that the West is over as we've known it. But I think, and you've written along those lines, I think we're approaching that moment. Because
Nice segue, Robert. You can get me. People get shitty when I complain. So I do have a piece in the Listener this week, coming to elderly people's doorstops near you, about what it would be like to have a schism with the United States, and a certain head of international affairs in Otago University was central to that. Bernard, you're busting, as it were.
Yeah, Robert, how is Trump going to get out of this? Because my understanding is Israel is not stopping. So Trump could, declare that he's going and leave and stop bombing Iran, but the Israelis won't stop. And also the Iranians will not stop until they've got the assurances they're not going to get bombed by either or both Israel and the United States. And they seem very determined to get those US bases out of the Middle East. So I don't understand how this ends.
Well, I think Mr. Trump's going to come up with some rationalisation for cutting and running, and he may even do that in the next week or so. what is interesting, Israel's position is a bit mysterious because they are exercising a very tight media blackout, but there are unconfirmed reports that Israel is taking a real pounding, and I don't know how long they're going to take it. Only 3 days ago, it was revealed from sources in Asian newspapers that the Ben Gurion International Airport has been closed because of 12 attacks on missiles. We're not seeing this in the Western media. So I don't know how long. I mean, let's be quite clear. With America out of the picture, Iran will fancy its chances in doing what it wants to do regionally. And
well, I think also, but wait a second. I think also, not that I'm as educated as you, Robert, but Israel's going to have more latitude if America gets out of the picture. No,
more latitude, but let's be quite clear. America and Israel both said on day 4 that Iran's missile attacks were rapidly down by about 75% or worse that effect. There's no sign that's actually objectively happening. And it's not me saying it. People like Lawrence Wilkerson and other observers far more knowledgeable on the strategic scene than I am are saying that the administration seems to be willfully underestimating and continues to underestimate Iranian military capabilities.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know. I don't see any indication that the Iranians are going to capitulate to the United States or Israel. They've certainly reframed the contest, as we've discussed before. They've increased the costs for both Israel and the United States. The other thing is the Golden Dome, or the Iron Dome, isn't it? Anti-missile system. The missile attacks, they're using hypersonic missiles. They're also using cluster bombs.
Yeah, well, cluster. They're using hypersonic. They're using missiles with. This is. I think we're going to be careful because the Israelis are. They are using ballistic missiles with multiple warheads. It's not that ban on cluster munitions that people talked about a few years ago.
Yeah,
but the same issue applies. Yeah,
yeah. What it causes real problems for the anti-missile system that Israel has.
Okay, can I ask you one last question, Robert? Because we have two people waiting in the green room. If you wouldn't mind, what did you take about his paragraph, which I'll put up and try and put up into the YouTube thing, about comparing this with other conflicts? We're a month in now, and he bothered to say. World War One American involvement lasted 1 year, 7 months and 5 days. World War Two was 3 years, 8 months and 25 days. Korean War was 3 years. Of course, it isn't finished because it was never a treaty, as we both know. Vietnam War lasted 19 years. I mean, what the hell was all that about? Other than a warning, it could go on a bit, but he's the only one who can solve it. Is that what did you take of that?
I think he's just putting the salesman's gloss on a operation that is not going according to plan. I think the Israelis and the Americans expected regime change with an intense bombardment, which initially killed much of the senior leadership. It certainly disrupted their chain of command, but it didn't destroy the regime. And what's more, Mr. Trump said he was providing a space for the protesters against the repressive clerical regime, providing opportunity to rise up and protest. But again, a miscalculation. An intensive air campaign doesn't create the conditions for people to come running out and protest against the regime. What's more, he seems to have the Israelis and the United States seem to have resuscitated the regime to some degree. So I think he was putting a very positive spin. The other thing was, he keeps saying, oh yes, I know the price of gas has gone up, he said at a press conference, but we're all now safer as a result in the United States. There was no sign of an imminent threat from Iran. And he, after all, boasted that he obliterated the Iranian military nuclear capabilities, such as they were, in June last year. And Netanyahu, his part, also said they had destroyed half of Iran's missile capabilities. So again, I think this was an attempt by Mr. Trump to put a very positive spin on an operation which has not lived up to expectations.
Yeah.
Robert, thank you so much for coming on. Great to hear you.
Thanks a lot, Robert. Are there any TUIs in Dunedin?
They're everywhere. They're going to take over the place. It's great.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now we welcome into the show Ed Miller, who's been a guest before, and we're really lucky to have him on again. Great to see you, Ed. Firstly, I was taken by an excellent op-ed that you had in the Post this week, talking about the very topical issue of diesel. What were you trying to say there in terms of how the current government has handled the crisis and what it did before it started?
Yeah, so there's a lot of noise coming from this government, one party in particular, New Zealand First, about the issue of the closure of the refinery in 2022, which I think was a serious issue. It's one I campaigned against for a long period of time. I think the common knowledge around our refinery is that a refinery by itself is useless for fuel security purposes from a New Zealand perspective, because it's generally understood that we can't efficiently refine Taranaki crude we couldn't rather, at Marsden Point. But what the refinery engineers told me, and what MB verified, is that we could very inefficiently produce a small amount of diesel or of liquid fuel, doesn't necessarily determine which kind of liquid fuel it is. We could produce enough to be able to, not business as usual, but enough to keep the ambulances running, the fire engines running, and the food distribution trucks moving around the country in the state of an absolute crisis. So we had called upon the government to intervene in that closure and to try and put some measures in place to keep the refinery open in the short term. So 5 to 7 years, something like that, so that there was enough space for the government to make the other necessary changes so that we didn't have these problems in front of us. So, electrification of those emergency services where possible, more storage, getting a plan written down somewhere, all of those kind of things. We lost that debate, obviously. The refinery was closed, but there was what we had said around the issue of fuel security did echo around Wellington, and there was a movement by the then Labour government to try and increase our domestic stock holdings, so holding more supply onshore as a result of that. And that the Labour government did pass rules requiring an increase in that, and actually the difference in that stock holding was going to be made up by a public diesel reserve of 70 million litres, which is equivalent to, in standard usage, it's about a week's worth of supply, but when you have a close down, then things change quite substantially and you can draw that out. So
Yeah, because New Zealand First have claimed a holier-than-thou status on all of this stuff, but actually it was Shane Jones, and your op-ed and some other reporting by Kate McNamara in particular has highlighted that, and there's actually a statement from Jones that nobody saw really in 2024, to the effect that, we thought about this Labour proposal for a new diesel reserve for 7 days or so, but we decided we couldn't afford it. It's going to cost us about $85 million, and we'd much prefer not to borrow the money, which just now of course it looks like the worst decision ever.
That was the same year that Budget 2024 gave $14.7 billion worth of tax cuts to high income earners. So I take with a grain of salt the complaint about not being able to afford it. I think the core of what Jones was trying to say at the time was Labour wasn't in a position to push the petrol companies around, couldn't tell them what to do, and I can tell them to increase their minimum fuel stock holdings from 21 days to 28 days. At least this is my reading of it. The problem is that Jones told them to do it by the 1st of July 2028. He gave them a 4-year window in which to comply with these rules. And that's exactly why we're in the position that we are now, where we are waiting on fuel to come into the country, but we have very low stock in this country. The CEO of Refining NZ, the company, of Channel Infrastructure, the updated of Refining NZ, said on News Talk ZB last week that it would take 2 to 3 months to get about 90 million litres worth of supply, worth of storage available. That's effectively a really good, strong steam clean of 2 of the big tanks that are sitting out there that used to store crude. And we saw today Shane Jones announce that they've reached an agreement with Channel Infrastructure that in 2 months' time they will have 2 tanks available, 90 million litres of storage. But our understanding from all the data that MB has provided us is that the boats will not be arriving from about the end of April onwards. So who knows what we're going to put in those 2 storage tanks. Great that we have them now.
Edward, it's Peter here. Thank you for coming on. We've talked about this, because I had said a couple of times on various recent editions of the podcast about to look at this question of whether the Labour Party effectively shut it down or allowed it to be shut down. And you have very deep understanding about that place, its possibilities. Did we just decide, was there a decision, 1970s, 1980s, I don't know when, to not give us any independent source to upgrade it to refined New Zealand oil? And do you think there was a kind of she'll be right approach behind this, or a kind of neoliberal idea that it was all going to be fine because we'd just always be able to buy it somewhere else?
I think there's a bit of all of those things. I mean, we in the decisions that were made decades and decades ago. The fuel that we have in Taranaki is probably higher value fuel than what we need. It's for higher value applications.
Really?
So we didn't want to necessarily lock ourselves in. And the fuel that we need to use most of the time is of lower value than that. So these were economic decisions, basically. The most efficient way of doing things was exporting what we had and importing what we needed. I guess the point that's important that you're hitting on, Peter, is that we haven't thought about this for a really long period of time.
Yeah.
We didn't think about this up until 2021 when we started making these arguments to government. The Labour government at the time realised actually there is a real serious issue here, and I think kind of the response to that was, well, we'll do something, but it's not really going to get us to where we need to be. And while I support in the strongest of terms what Bernard is saying about the all hands to the deck wartime electrification, in the state of a crisis, when that's not, those options aren't necessarily in front of you, then you really do have to think, did we make the right decisions at the right time? There's a lot of grandstanding going on right now, and it's it's a difficult situation to be in for sure. And
Ed, would love to have you on again. Thank you. That was really interesting. Thank you.
And just finally, Ed, are we going to make it through to the end of May? And if we don't see an opening in the Strait of Hormuz, are we going to be okay?
I was thinking about this just earlier today in response to some questions that I had. The big question is, why are we not hitting the panic button at the level that we should be hitting the panic button? The problem is storage. If we start introducing conservation measures now, then when the next tanker arrives, we don't necessarily have anywhere to put that incoming fuel. And if a tanker is made to sit outside Marsden Point for a couple of days waiting for us to use up that fuel, then
it could easily bugger off somewhere else
and take it somewhere else. So we are in a very precarious situation. I don't want to put too fine a point on it beyond that, but I hope we make it.
Ed, thank you very much for coming on to the show.
Thank you very much, Ed.
To see you again with some expert analysis on the fuel situation. And we're very lucky to have Max Rashbrook join us.
Impeccably dressed, may I add, as always,
wonderful.
Max.
It makes me want to go and
makes me want
to run away and put a tie on.
I might just put a bolo tie on with a piece of Panama or something. Yeah.
Max has got an event he needs to get to and be out. So I'll ask him a question quickly. Max, what do you think the government should be doing to soften the blow for those who really don't have any buffer of their own?
Well, although it's going to be expensive, I think they need to extend the payments they're making, that extra $50 a week, because that only goes to, because as people have probably clocked by now, 140,000 households, people who get the in-work tax credit. And that actually misses out a huge number of low-income people, including people who are working, but if they're receiving a benefit in any shape or form, they can't get the in-work tax credit, even though they're probably driving to work, just like the people the government's claiming to help. So I think we need to extend those extra payments to people who actually genuinely need it, not just a class of people who happen to get a payment the government already has. And I think we also need to look at complementary measures. I know Tim Welch from Auckland University has been saying we should be making public transport free for 3 months. I don't think that would work instead of the payments the government is making, because not everyone can use public transport. But as a complement, I think it would make a huge amount of sense. Reduce costs for people and reduce the demand for fuel.
Max, do you think that the government is right when it says we can't afford this? We've got so much debt, and if we choose to splash the cash like Labor did, we'll just create inflation and the bond markets will punish us. Is that true?
No, I don't think so. And look, I mean, and no one has been better than you, I think, in highlighting some of the scaremongering around debt. I mean, look, it is true the New Zealand government is currently running a deficit, so extra money spent will be more borrowing, and that does come with a cost. But not acting comes with a cost, as I've been pointing out in my columns. If families aren't supported properly through this crisis, so many of them, thousands of them who are barely coping, will be tipped into outright collapse and dysfunction and relationship breakup and homelessness. And that will have huge long-run costs, which are probably greater than the extra interest that we have to pay for the borrowing.
And you only have to look at the slightly worrying parallels with 1990, 1991, at the start of the Gulf War, when there was a spike up in fuel prices. And at the same time, the government took a more aggressive, to be fair, austerity approach than the current government. Ruth Richardson didn't advance any help, and it was a combination of high unemployment, lower benefits, actually lower in nominal and real term benefits, plus this fresh energy shock, which really, created a generation of poverty that is replicating now. You'd think this government would be quite keen on long-term saving money for the state and improving productivity and reducing the risks of scarring another generation of workers apart from anything else. It was interesting that, as he reported today, that even David Seymour was trying to get a wider measure of the cost-benefit analysis of more spending on health.
Yeah.
To get that through. Why do you think this government is so reluctant to think about the longer term in a fiscal sense in terms of, the damage you do now and the costs later?
Well, I think most New Zealand governments tend towards being short-termist. That's not a unique National Party problem. It's partly a function of our electoral cycle and 3-year terms. And I think, in a sense, they're the victims of their own rhetoric, because they spend all this time, particularly in opposition, lamenting government spending and lamenting debt. And so when they get in, even the few cabinet ministers who I think probably would take a long-term view if they were free to do so are the prisoners of their own rhetoric. And, they've whipped up this base that is terribly concerned about debt. I have quite sensible, even left-wing, centre-left people saying to me, oh, aren't we drowning in debt? That message has got so entrenched. So I think that's part of it. And I think also they don't really distinguish between borrowing for the long term and borrowing for the short term in a funny sort of way. So they're always saying, look, we're borrowing too much and, Fitch has just given us a downgrade. But what people are worried about is if you're borrowing for, if you're putting the groceries on the credit card. But there is no ratings agency that has ever said, if you borrowed more to invest in things that make sense over the long term, we will look more harshly on your debt. So there's this weird mingling together of those two things.
Max, and this is a bit of a doozy because I know you have to dash away, so I don't mind you giving a curtailed version, but I was talking to Patrick Smelly about the same issue today, and he's a bit of a friend of the show, and of course was also an advisor to Roger Douglas. Are there elements of this where we are paying a price for the last nearly 30 years of neoliberal economics? where it becomes exposed, our reliance on trade, our reliance on being able to just buy it at the highest price, at the best price, I'm sorry?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think, what sort of a hardline version of economics tends to give you is an extreme focus on efficiency. And that has its merits, but it means you don't build in the things that engineers tend to care more about, which is resilience and a bit of surplus capacity, buffers, all those kinds of things. And look, I won't give you a huge long answer on this, but we're seeing all around the world a shift towards greater resilience, people doing more stuff on shore, even if that comes at some cost to short-term efficiency. And it's notable, very few people picked up on it, but Phil O'Reilly, formerly of Business New Zealand, wrote a piece about increasing our national economic resilience in the Herald back in February, where he was saying, look, everyone is doing a protectionism now. And, reluctant as he felt about that as a business person, we were probably going to have to do some form of, greater investment in our own economy, contrary to the dictates of, neoclassical economics or neoliberalism or what have you. And I think that discussion about national economic resilience, which tends to be pretty close to industry policy, that sort of discredited old phrase that's back in vogue, I think that discussion is only going to intensify in the next 8 months in the run-up to the election.
You make a great point there, Max, about how neoliberalism really optimizes for efficiency and ignores resilience, essentially assumes that the market will solve the problem. And what often happens in crises is the government is forced to step in and solve the problem. And so the neoliberals get the benefits both ways. They get the efficiency and then they get a bailout because they haven't thought about the resilience. It would be great actually to get Phil onto the show. Do you think that our opposition are really able to tell the story about the need for resilience and the failure of optimizing everything for efficiency and for profits and the lowest possible cost?
I think New Zealand First absolutely is comfortable telling that story. I mean, I know they're not the opposition at the moment, but who knows? They could be again, because they've always focused on exactly what their name suggests, New Zealand First, and they've been pretty open to protectionism. I think, and the Greens probably to some extent as well in a different way. I think for Labour it's very difficult because they have subscribed to a fairly hardline free trade view for a long time now. I think they do want to do something different. The Future Fund they announced last year, $200 million to invest in New Zealand startups, was a partial attempt to change direction, although not a particularly thorough one. And I think what's hard is that, industry policy, frankly, the government taking a view that we need to develop the economy in certain directions and not others, is absolutely possible. In fact, it's necessary. But doing it well is very difficult because you are pushing against, what the market would dictate.
Of orthodoxy,
you do have
too.
to have quite sophisticated government. It's very easy to do industry policy and resilient stuff badly. And I don't think Labour feels economically tooled up at the moment to do that policy work and to tell that story.
Thank you so much, and we'll let you get away. It's been wonderful to talk to you again, and you've given us a great idea for another guest.
You have two other. We'll get Patrick and you and Phil, and we'll deconstruct the last 30 years of New Zealand economics. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Max. Catch you later.
Thanks.
Alrighty, it is time now.
Bernard, you were going to do a swift soliloquy, or have you already done it in a sense? Do you think?
No, I'll give you a swift soliloquy.
Yeah.
I think the government's adherence to its Roads of National Significance program, it was one of its main reasons to get elected, is now blown out of the water completely, and not just by the rising price of fuel, but by the economics of the projects themselves, which we've discovered in the last couple of weeks will mean that even with tolls, we're going to see $20 billion at least of spending in which taxpayers and drivers around the rest of the country will have to pay 97% of the cost of this motorway to Whangarei. And it would actually be cheaper to pay for return air tickets with Air New Zealand for every Northlander than to build these roads. And if they were to be properly paid for with tolls, you'd have to literally pay about $1,500 return for every single trip on those motorways, which are still being built. And we have to hope that Chris Bishop, who has lost a couple of his roles in this latest reshuffle, is able to follow through with his suggestions that they will be turned off.
Is that it, Bernard?
That's my soliloquy.
That is the shortest sort of. So I'm going to take us all back to probably fifth form English, but because I didn't go to a private school, I know about this, I think, from other people, but it's related to the Trump Library, is the skateboarding dog, or the end of the show. This ludicrous tower envisaged, but doesn't exist yet, but gold. So I think 70 stories. It overtakes by about 20 stories the Freedom Tower in Miami that has been, there as a kind of beacon to people from Cuba. Also, we had the renaming this week of the Palm Beach International Airport to the Donald J. Trump International Airport. And we've also had a judge ordering the construction of the ludicrous ballroom to stop. So I thought, and we don't do enough poetry on this show, I could say, I met it, and people will roll their eyes. I know, I can see several people already rolling their eyes. I met a traveller from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survived, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked him and the heart that fed, and on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside me remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away."
That is excellent. I think that's very appropriate. Thank you very much, Peter. I
may not be able to go to Europe through the United States in the next little while, but yeah,
go through Dubai. It's very quiet there.
I am going through Dubai. I am literally going through, but I'll be wearing my bicycle hat, and everything will be fine.
Yep. No, let's hope so. I'm Bernard Hickey, co-host of the Weekly Hoon with Peter Bale. Ka kite anō, everyone. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
See you guys. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.